So hello everyone, welcome to Clinical Research Talk Series. So we are today on episode 5. So today we'll be talking about the future of clinical trial. We'll be discussing the future emerging technologies in clinical trials and how can they have an impact on transformation of the healthcare. So let's start this particular session. So let's talk about the current state of the clinical trial. So as we know that when it comes to clinical trial and drug development, it is a very expensive and time consuming process because you have to go through a lot of testing, a lot of simulations, a lot of drug trials. And this particular entire process is time consuming. It requires on an average 5 years to 7 years to complete the trial, right from preclinical phase to phase 4, phase 3, and then you get the approval. Okay. And also, in terms of expenses or finances required, a sponsor has to spend anywhere around a lot of money to fund this particular trial because he has to wait for 5 years with his drug, and then the process or the outcomes come. So it is very important that we use the time and the monetary resource very smartly, and that is why it is very important that the clinical trials be conducted through the integration of technology, the use of informatics in this data world, and this can help in the improvement of the patient outcomes. Now, how can this be done? So, through the entire drug development process, the technology is going to impact in terms of integration through modeling, through simulation and modern technology. So, the drug design modeling, we are all aware, but there is also a simulation part of it, and modern technologies such as artificial intelligence, machine learning, it can be added into drug development process and clinical trial process. So if we observe in the last 3 decades, it is noted that around 25 to 50% of the clinical trial comprising of the new drug application either failed to achieve their objective or they were unable to contribute for a registration, which simply means that if even if a pharma company decides to invest in clinical trials, it is not sure shot that you are going to get the registration or the approval for your medication. Now, this could boil down to the fact that you are either not working out the trial correctly, there are some loopholes, or there are inadequate use of finances. So these challenges can be bettered through technology. And as we know, during COVID-19, we have faced a very big challenge in terms of implementation itself. So through the advent of technology, we can change the pace of the clinical trial and the health outcomes. So let's talk about uh, this particular session. So moving forward, I want you to inform that this particular clinical research talk series is in collaboration between two YouTube channel. So Alpha to Omega, run by Aditi, as well as Clinical Research X360 and Clinical Aim Research. So I would like to inform that you can view this particular session on YouTube and listen on Spotify. Okay, and please make sure that you subscribe so that we could have a better reach and improve healthcare awareness. So let's hear from Aditi about that how trials are transforming after SARS COVID-19 outbreak.
Yeah, so COVID-19 proved to be vital for the drug development process because, of course, we had to repurpose a lot of older drugs, older approved drugs for different kind of antiviral therapy, as well as the clinical trial process of COVID-19 was, of course, very important for the need for change and importance of integrating technology in clinical trials. Now, the one very big change in COVID-19 was the change in trial design because COVID-19 used an adaptive trial design for the clinical trials rather than aiming for rigid endpoints. So, of course, in our previous videos, we have discussed a lot about outcomes and endpoints in a statistical point of view. But here, in each step, there were different kind of endpoints, as we were changing the trial according to the previous endpoint, which is not typical for clinical trials earlier than this. And as of course, since because of the pandemic, we used different kind of outcomes, more technology in patient engagement, enrollment, and trial management, and which is very important for remote monitoring as well as decentralization, because it was very important to decentralize the trial. Now, there were many open research forums for data mining, and this is because data mining was utilized to find new kind of medicines or different kind of therapies for COVID-19, and there were different kind of AI based data mining tools that were developed just for this purpose. And at this moment, they're still under copyright, so we cannot mention them, but we would like to have a discussion about this in the future. But Saurabh, you have worked a lot on the COVID-19 trial yourself. So what do you think was different from a practical point of view in the COVID-19 trial?
Yeah. COVID-19 was a major revolution in terms of clinical research, that is hands down. So the thing is, when we talk about centralized trial or decentralized trial, you have to understand that before the pandemic hit, the trial used to carry out at a particular research site or what we call as clinical trial centers. But the pandemic stopped everything, and it accelerated the use of adaptive trial design, because now all the sponsors or even the drug company wanted to work towards a single goal to find a vaccine. But that we had to do, the biggest challenge was to protect the patient safety also, because there should not be any exposure to and their health uh, point of view. So what we did is, we added the adaptive trial design, where we reduce the number of in-person visit, and whatever the adverse events were, we communicated that through telemedicine or using phone calls to check over the subject progress, or to check his adverse events or health outcomes. So during the solidarity trial, it was a bigger challenge, because the adaptive trial design was in a beta phase before that, but it had to be implemented right there. So it was a big pivot in terms of using the adaptive trial design and decentralizing the entire aspect of clinical trial as we know. So that was the biggest challenge. But looking retrospectively, it was the best thing that could happen to clinical research, because it was high time that we try to use technology and decentralization and reduce the number of unwanted visit, where the kind of health outcomes or the medical tests to be done. So we had to reduce it at some point of time, but it could also have a very serious impact on the use of financial resources. So that was a very big challenge and opportunity at the same time. And it really accelerated the development of the drug. And we could see that the emergency user approval was given in record time, in less than 2 years. So that was a very good experience in terms of adaptive trial design. So moving forward, let's see about the decentralization concept of clinical trial, which I mentioned.
Yeah, so decentralization is really important. It's important in it's decentralization is gaining importance in every field, from clinical trial to finance to everything. So, in brief, I would just like to define decentralization for a minute. So, decentralization is basically when we are moving away from a central point or a procedure. And in clinical trials, it's relevant when we are using, say, remote technology or other technology to monitor trials that could be in a far off location. So decentralization are can talk about carrying trials remotely as well as using digital tools to collect data or manage the framework of the trial. And it can be also used for other aspects like monitoring consent, monitoring randomization, inclusion, but also the safety and efficacy data for an investigational medical product. So trials are often a mix of decentralized and traditional, which are referred to as hybrid trials. In fact, there are several trials like this because we have a requirement nowadays to be for trials to be multi-centric. So when we are monitoring trials which are in another country or perhaps another part of the country, we can use a lot of technology to uh, decentralize a trial. Now, the major advantage of decentralization is that it can help bridge the technological gap and make monitoring of a decentralized trial easier. Now, the significance of this is that there could be several trials that are carried out in parts of the world or the country or maybe even the city that may not manage the may not have that good infrastructure in terms of you could say in terms of internet or other sort of hospital facilities or other facilities. So this can really help bridge that gap, and this is an intelligent way to manage trials because it helps in making sure that several of these procedures are adhered to, because as we have all worked in the clinical research industry, so sometimes we know that there may not be 100% adherence to protocol, and it can be difficult to monitor that because by the time there is a site visit, these very minor protocol deviations can be overlooked. But if we integrate smart technology into today's clinical trials, we can ensure that neither are they overlooked, no, neither are there any sort of deviations. And we can ensure consistency in a clinical trial through decentralization and hybridization of trials, and of course, bridging the technological gap. Now, these decentralized clinical trials can use a lot of digital technology, and many a times they can be as remote as that. They can be even monitored from the patient's home for certain kind of diseases, and so these are gaining more importance rather than traditional decentralization. And now patient centricity is the biggest asset of decentralized study because we make the life of the patient simpler through decentralization in terms of protecting their rights at each moment and making their visits or other things consistent for them. Because when we are protecting patient rights, when we are making a trial for the patient, then we are going to get a patient that adheres to the clinical trial, and through that we are just helping ourselves help with the and getting consistent data. So what do you have to say about this, or do you have any
Yeah, of
opinions
course.
on?
Yeah. So ideally, before the pandemic hit, we were obviously going for audio video consent or the traditional consent, and that part was very well familiar with us. But during the pandemic, we shifted our focus to these particular hybrid trials. So what happened is during the particular recruitment phase, we had challenges of recruiting subject, but the bigger challenge was to retain those particular subjects, because you can call the subject for the initial screening, but when it comes to patient visit, so patient retention is a very big factor, and it entirely depends on the patient safety and availability or their ease to visit the site. And as we know that anyways clinical trial are designed by keeping the patient at the center of it, but that was not very evident because we called patient for a number of visits and they had to take some effort. But during the hybrid model which we used, what we did in one of the trials was we created an application so which they could download. And as you know that there is a data revolution, internet revolution in India. We have the cheapest data rates, and there is monthly around 4 million smartphone users to be added in the Indian population. So that was advantages for us, because around 80 to 90% of our subject had smartphones, or at least a family member had smartphone. So that particular application, so we used to train the subjects on the electronic diary, where he did not had to come to the site. In the pandemic, he could directly mention or tick the check boxes if he had any fever, any swelling, or any adverse event. And based on the assessment of the safety data, whether if there were any adverse event which he needed to be hospitalized, then the medical team would review and they would visit to his particular house. So that's where the mobile clinics concept also we used, where the site team used to go to their house instead of the subject coming with complaints. So hybrid trials were literally used in for COVID-19 pandemic. And going forward, I literally feel that there is a lot of advantage in terms of patient centricities of decentralized trial. And it was time that we reduced the unwanted site visit, and we went to the subjects instead of subjects coming to us. And that not only help in a financial way in terms of travel reimbursement, it also help in subject retention, which is one of the major and critical part of clinical trial. Because no matter how much subject you recruit, at the end of your trial, how much you retain, and that particular data is counted when it comes to statistical analysis. So subject dropout was drastically reduced, patient comfort was increased. We in terms of finance, there was a lot of saving. And we literally felt like we stepped into a newer age of clinical research, where technology was working hand in hand. And the kind of application based mobile we have today, so we are very much familiar of interacting with that technology. So decentralized clinical trial are literally not the future, but present scenario of Indian clinical research, at least. And it in no time, I'm sure it is going to be one of the mainstream type of clinical trial design, the hybrid design. So we do want to move towards the fully decentralized trial and use the wearable and telehealth or digital therapeutic type of design. But that will take some time. But at this point of time, I can say that the hybrid model or the decentralized clinical trial model is literally the future of clinical trials.
Yeah, so this is I would like to talk about virtual and in silico trials. So the main definition of virtual or in silico trials are trials that are carried out in a virtual population in an in silico environment. In simple words, an in silico environment can be described as a computer, that's something that is carried on in a computer. And this can eventually help in decreasing the amount of patients and dosing errors and improve outcomes. And this will eventually decrease the cost of clinical trials. Now, how does this reduce the amount of patients? Well, because we simulate the patient in a virtual scenario with different kind of covariates and different kind of outcomes, and therefore we can maybe decrease the amount of patients, and we'll definitely end up decreasing dosing errors because we try different kind of situation. We simulate different kind of scenarios and improve outcomes and reduce the cost of the trial thereby. Now, how do we make a clinical trial simulation? Well, the downside to a clinical trial simulation is that there is no one size fits all kind of approach. It has to be customized according to the drug and the trial design and the patient covariates. And then, of course, one can integrate different kind of PKPD models and then simulate the trial. Now, this is important because we have to consider different components within a simulation, like perhaps the design, the structure, or the different kind of parameter, the different structure of the different PKPD models, as well as there could be some inter-individual variability and residual error, which could be the unexplained variability and covariates. So the type of drug and trial design can help predict the outcomes, and there are several ways that this can help. And it is to be noted that a virtual and in silico trial cannot replace a human trial either in a realistic way or a scientific way or an ethical way or perhaps even a regulatory way, but it is just used to design a trial in a way that we can design the best clinical trial possible and thereby the keep the patient in mind, keep different kind of patient in mind, because one of the major reasons of patient dropout are dosing errors, because one has to understand that we have different type of patients in a clinical trial, and one dose may not fit everybody, because some patients may have different kind of metabolism and or different other covariates which may affect drug metabolism, and then this may have major consequences on outcomes like half-life or other aspects or bioavailability, and thereby the wrong dose can really cause a lot of problems in the outcomes and in the dropout and what we are trying to simulate. So we can simulate a trial considering the different kind of common outcomes. For example, we can take the kidney function, we can take the body weight of the patient, or different covariates that we think are significant. So sort of, how do you think that if we were to design a virtual in silico trial and then carry out the trial in the real patient, do you think that it would be helpful in a practical way?
Of course. So when it comes to virtual in silico trials, so it is tremendously helpful because the thing is, with the availability of today's technology, it can process a very, very large amount of data. And you have to understand that when it comes to clinical trial, there are two fundamental rules. First is we reduce the errors, we reduce the wrong dosing, as you clearly stated. Second is the use of finances in an efficient manner. So if we run any virtual or in silico trial, and if it helps in a predictive form to highlight some outcomes or some lacunae which we would observe in real patient trial, so it would help us design a trial model which is efficient, as well as it will help in a predictive form to let us know that what were the loopholes. Okay. And the most important part of it, of this particular in silico trials, are that we are in no way harming the patient safety, but we are improving it. So before even you give your medication to the subject, you are simulating that, and based on the learnings of simulation, you design your trial. So virtual and in silico trials are very helpful and very resource efficient also, because as we all know that at the end of the day, whatever the money you spent in R&D in clinical trial, that all adds up to the expense of that particular medication. So if we use the power of machine learning, artificial intelligence, and run this virtual or in silico trials, we can significantly reduce the cost of the medication and also improve the health outcomes, which essentially reduce the cost of clinical trials.
Yeah,
And with the, yeah, yeah.
and modeling and simulation is something that is done in every field. Like, for example, if we have the automobile industry, then if they want to simulate a crash scenario or different scenarios, they're not going to actually put in humans in there. They are going to simulate it virtually and try to design the safest car or safest automobile that you have. And this is one of the a clinical trial, or a virtual in silico trial is the future in a way that perhaps it was long overdue. And this will improve outcomes in clinical trials and simulate them before they're in the actual human patient population. And this will, of course, as we mentioned, we will improve the outcomes, because we are going to come up with the best case scenario, and we are going to eliminate the worst case scenario with a in silico trial, which would have perhaps we would have not realized that there is a worst case scenario until and unless we went to the actual human population. And there have been
Exactly,
several
exactly.
incidents where there have been fatal dosing errors in clinical trials with and without without virtual simulations. And this
Exactly.
is the
So
aim to not just reduce costs, because that is secondary, but to really save and protect human life in the end of the day.
of course, the cardinal rule of clinical trial is the safety first and everything comes secondary. So, by running this in silico virtual trial, you are essentially establishing a safety parameter before even if you give that drug to a actual human study participant. So, of course, these trials would significantly help in positive health outcomes and maintaining safety. Now, let's talk
Yes.
about the upcoming technology for clinical research. So, in of course, so we are going to again talk about COVID-19 trial. So as you all know that telemedicine was the future of healthcare, but I'm very much sure that telemedicine is the present aspect of healthcare, because in COVID-19 we use telemedicine a lot, extensively, and we were very fortunate that uh, with the use of smartphones and technology, patients and their health outcomes were properly managed. Then, when it comes to BYOD, it is bring your own device. So this is particularly that a lot of population has either smartphone or traditional mobile phones, and if you could set up an application, or if you have a centralized call centers, so you could also look over the patient health outcomes and have a regular follow up. Then the electronic source, the ECOA as well as e-consenting. So these technologies were used in COVID-19 trial, where the subject did not have to expose himself out, but he was virtually able to participate in the clinical trial to provide the critical data, and it actually expedited the process of clinical trial conduct itself, and it significantly affected the e-recruitment in a positive way, because the use of social media and the other platforms where not essentially the subject were called on site, but they were electronically contacted through social media, through phones. Okay, so this e-recruitment is also the future and the present of clinical trial. And finally, when it comes to patient engagement, so instead of traditional method where the patient has to come on site, so based on the risk to the that particular patient, and based on patient's health outcomes, so patient engagement was to the next level, because wherever the assistance was required in terms of adverse events or serious adverse event, the site doctors and the healthcare staff, they themselves visited to the patient's house. So patient centricity was greatly advanced in this particular use of technology. So, Aditi, you would like to talk about the other aspects?
Yeah. So this is more about logistics of clinical trial as well as healthcare informatics, and somewhere within we would like to talk about where they meet and the significance of them. So the firstly, we've talked a lot about data in the previous videos, and today, as we know, data is the most important. It's as important as oil, or if not more. And here we collect a lot of data during a clinical trial, and also during various other health analytics devices. But if I have to shift focus to clinical trials, we have the very important and highly underrated electronic data capture device or application, whatever it may be. So EDC integration. So as we have discussed in the previous videos, an EDC is not just where you enter the data, but it could be a very important tool for different kind of analytics and also processing the data and finding trends. Because when we are entering data into an EDC, we are just entering it in its raw format. So here there are various upcoming technologies in terms of EDCs, and we could call them a smart EDC. So that can give this EDC can be modified in several ways to accommodate decentralized trials, to accommodate other kind of adaptive trial designs. And this is going to, and of course we can use EDC for trial analytics, which I will come to later. And as we have learned, EDC integration is very important. Now, from EDC, we are talking strictly about patients that are enrolled in a clinical trial, but every day there are a lot of devices that we have on our smartphones, as well as maybe our smart watches, that is giving a lot of data, that can monitor a lot of data. And this is variables, this is what we can call variables. And this variable can count steps per day, heart rate, and other kind of important functions. So this can give a lot of data about different kind of people, age groups, because when you're essentially consenting to have that application, you are giving some information about yourself. From here, perhaps we can find trends in a certain population, in a certain kind of age group, or other trends. So these are very important for health analytics. And then we come back to IMP tracking. So IMP tracking is, of course, we have the investigational medicinal product, and oftentimes that can be very expensive. And in its own way, it is the center of the of the clinical trial, because we want to get data of that. But unfortunately or fortunately, it is often misused at sites. And we want to eliminate the paper-based IMP tracking, but perhaps a better and smarter electronic IMP tracking, or a web-based IMP tracking, can improve outcomes. So through this, one can monitor the number of IMPs in a particular site, or one can monitor the expiry date, or place an order for it, or do several through an IMP tracking, which is tech for the future. And medical record review, because now in most countries developing and develop, we have like an electronic medical record of different patients. So this is a massive amount of data generated in healthcare centers each day, and each hour, each minute. And through this, as we mentioned, as Saurabh, you mentioned about e-recruitment, we can either find patients to recruit for a clinical trial, or we can perhaps understand healthcare, understand trends better, because this is a lot of data. And this can be analyzed in a way to explore further treatment, or explore a patient group, or also understand what the sort of diseases are rising. Because if there are certain new diseases, that way pharmaceutical companies can get a lot of information from medical records. to understand what they need to be working towards or the goals that they need to be working towards. And also, we discuss remote monitoring in decentralized trials and how we need technology, how we need better technology. And the last one that is last but definitely not the least is trial analytics, because each trial nowadays a lot of trials are multi-centric. That way one is getting a lot of information from those trials, and we still want the trial to be analyzed in the correct way. And it's not just about the trial and endpoints anymore, but it's also about what kind of patients are being recruited. So that can also be important for the kind of analytical data that one could acquire from a clinical trial. So trial analytics is very important. But however, we discussed this and we discussed data. Now, when we discuss data, essentially privacy is really important. And Saurabh, I would like to hand the stage to you to discuss privacy.
Yeah, of course. When it comes to privacy, we have to understand that data can be used either ways, for good or bad. So, data in medical, particular clinical trial is generated in tremendous amount, and anyone who could know what is affecting you, what is your medical condition, it is as good as giving your map coordinate, and any harm can be done to you, because with the advent of new technologies, we are giving out more data than we even think. But when it comes to protecting that data, there are guidelines, but these guidelines are not as much fast paced as compared to the pace of the current technology. So even if we have the HIPAA guidelines, we have the GCPs, but when it comes to electronic data, when it comes to electronic consent, so it is surprisingly ignored or developed in a very very slow fashion, because you have to understand that this particular pandemic set a very very clear precedence that the future of healthcare is going to be decentralized, it is going to be remote, and the electronic form of communication and the generation of data, it is going to be a tremendous opportunity for all kinds of technologies, may that be telemedicine, may that be the wearable technology. But while we conduct this particular trial for medical health outcomes, there has to be some kind of guidelines or framework to counter use of this particular data in any inappropriate formats. So there are DSM-5 guidelines, there are HIPAA convention, but nowhere does it clearly restricts the use of data or interpretation of data or sharing that data with various stakeholders who could gain a inappropriate advantage when it comes to health outcome. Because you have to understand that your data is the most prized possession that you can ever have. Because if you see the social media, Facebook, or any other social media app, what it is doing is it is looking your interaction with that particular post or that particular content, so it can send you targeted advertisements. But when it comes to your health, then whatever health data you have, so it could also lead you to purchase some drug which were targeted for your health. And if any particular entity wanted your health to deteriorate, so they can also use that same data. So it is a double-edged sword indeed. So let's discuss this particular aspect of using novel technology in a balanced format. So as we know that we are into the age where the continuous measurement or the activity of the behavior of the subject can be detected through sophisticated sensor. Okay, and these sensor in terms of wearable technology in your Apple Watch or in your any other smart fitness band can help and give just in time interventions also. So as we all know, there was a case where the Apple Watch had the fall detection sensor, which essentially triggered the call to an ambulance and the life was saved. So technology is always has two faces, good and bad. but it is very important that we use that technology to advance medicine as well as have the balance of it. The second aspect would be the patient follow-ups through telemedicine, because as I've already said that patient recruitment is one aspect, but patient retention is entirely a different ball game. But by the use of telemedicine, we can not only help with patient recruitment but also maintain the regional and cultural variability. Okay, because as we have seen that clinical trials are conducted in medical centers or research site which are mostly in the urban areas, but the medication which you use, it is not essentially used by the urban population, it is used by the remote and the village population also. So there is a need to have a regional and cultural variability in your subject recruitment pool, and that is where telemedicine can help connect those particular remote areas and remote cultural population into bringing them to the mainstream of recruitment and clinical trials. So this will essentially help the patient health outcome and clear a prediction of the dosage and the effects of the drug on the medicine. Next part would be the wearables. So wearables is the future of technology and it is changing by the day. And these sensors not only help in calculating or tracking your medical data, but also help in compliance with the study protocol, because they can give you reminders about not only your alarms, but they can also tell you about it is time to take your medicine, or it is time to report any health outcomes you have, which essentially helps in collection of the data, the safety data, and compliance with the protocol. Next part would be if you see the larger scope of this particular trial. So the modern technological delivery system which we have, so if we could send a particular food from one restaurant to the customer, we can also use this particular delivery systems to reach a remote location of the subject. We could essentially use these delivery systems to drop off any medication or any particular trial kit to that particular subject. And the most important aspect it would have in patient compliance as well as treatment and lower dropouts rate, because a lot of time it happens that subject comes for a couple of visit and then due to the hassle of coming to the site for every time, so through use of modern technology we can reach them and reduce the dropout rate. And finally, it is very important that we have reached a point where the internet and smartphone revolution has entered into our life and has become the pinnacle of modern human interaction. And it is time that we use this particular internet and smartphone to transform medical research as well, because it is going to play a significant role on patient health outcomes. And I am obviously in the favor of bringing this technology, implementing it. But when it comes to privacy, there are concerns. And through this particular podcast and session, I want to clearly highlight that technology and its use is obviously the need of the hour, but the pace at which the privacy laws or regulation or framework is being done, so it is out of sync. And we have to concretely work hand in hand and at the same pace as the implementation of the technology. Okay, what do you think about this, Aditi?
Yeah, I thought this conversation is relevant and
Correct.
interesting, of course, because as somebody who is more into AI ML and other sort of studies, I often read really interesting studies about, how machine learning was used to say, uh, predict a heart attack, or how AI could identify, say, you know, uh, there was a study done recently where AI could identify depression or like other health or other central nervous diseases like a stroke or like dementia or other problems just by listening to by collecting information and finding the trends within a patient, like the subjects recordings, like the voice recordings or phone recordings. But so this really helps them kind of identify patterns within patients that are eventually going to get dementia or other diseases, and or might be already suffering from that, and various other kind of stages of that. So I think that is really relevant. But at the same time, what also went through my mind is, hey, what happens to privacy? Because AI is tremendously powerful at this moment. We can predict heart attacks, we can predict brain diseases, we can predict other problems, we can predict autism. But then in the end, what happens to the privacy? And you mentioned a very important point that these wearables also collect a lot of data of us. We may not be aware of it when we are signing up for it, because maybe we just want something simple. Like I have an app called Pedometer, and it is collecting data about how many steps per day I'm doing. But at the same time, I'm giving off my information about where I am, like my location and other aspects. So um, I may not always want that, but it is unknowingly collecting a lot of data without taking my permission. Or other than that, there are also other kind of applications that are collecting data that may not take your permission. So it can be, or you don't realize to what extent of permission you've given. But I think we've covered a very important topic about wearables and telemedicine and consent. And this is a really interesting discussion about the improvement and the upgrade of the consent measures. So that could be a topic for the future. Yeah.
Yeah, great. So, what are we going to see in the upcoming sessions?
So up next is exciting. And within our episodes, we started getting little creative, and perhaps you could even say risky. And we want to talk about COVID-19 and various aspects of the COVID-19 clinical trial, where we want to talk about the adaptive trial design in detail. And we want to talk about these decentralization of the particular COVID-19 trial, and also statistical significance with because a lot of the decisions in the COVID trial were based on statistical significance, as well as risk-based monitoring. So we're really excited. And of course, Saurabh, you are really interested in emergency
Yeah,
approvals,
so
and that could be a very important topic that we are covering in the
correct, correct,
next
correct.
video,
Yeah,
because a
because
lot of people have the same question that, hey, I know that a clinical trial is supposed to take up to 7 years to from phase 1 to phase 4. How did I get a, approval or a finished product in 8 months? So that would be a very interesting discussion. What do you have to say?
yeah, correct. Because there was this particular understanding that it takes 5 to 7 years to develop a drug. But when it came to pandemic, there was a provision called as emergency user authorization, and it essentially gave you the COVID-19 pandemic and help in reducing pandemic. But what are the convention where, or what are the scenarios where you could get this particular approval? And I really want our viewers to know that how this approval is granted and what are the pros and cons of the same, because a half baked product can not have all the aspects covered when it comes to safety of that particular drug or vaccine. So it will be a very interesting topic to see in the next session, that how these approvals are granted, and what is the future of clinical research, even in terms of regulatory applications or approvals.
Yeah. So thank you, everybody. This is our acknowledgement. These are the different kind of these are the different kind of uh, sources that we've used to gather this information. So it's not just our own experience in clinical trials, but it's various other sources. And as usual, we would like to thank people that are putting out so much of information out there and contributing to this open source community of knowledge. So
That's what I would like to say.
Yeah, so we would like to thank all the references and all the data that is being available today so that we could have this conversation. And before finishing off this session, I would like to inform that we are on the YouTube and Spotify platforms. So the audio files and the people on the video streaming platform can listen to these particular sessions. And please make sure that you subscribe and share this particular session on different YouTube channels and Spotify channels so that we could bring awareness to the general population regarding healthcare, and also through these evolving discussion we could have some key aspects which are not maybe looked at this point of time, but it can significantly contribute towards the future of clinical research. So this is me, Saurabh and Aditi with me signing off for this session, and thank you all for joining us today.
And see you next week.
Sure.